Okay, welcome everyone to Improving Scrum with Kanban. This is a next up webinar, and I'm delighted to have both our CEO Steve Cooper's with us today. We also have another senior Agile trainer, Mac, is with us. So I would invite you both to give color to what I'm sharing. And Hira is with us today as the training ops and sort of host person that's going to help us run the show and gather questions as we go. So we're going to just kick things off here with the title slide. And again, Improving Scrum with Kanban. My name is Kurt Peterson, and I'm a trainer and Agilist here. I'm a lead trainer and Agilist at Next Up Solutions. So who are we? For this, I'd just like to say we're a fantastic company, and I'd like to give Steve a moment to give us a little voice to Next Up Solutions and acceleration.
Well, welcome everyone, and thank you, Kurt. Yes, we are all about Agile. We understand that moving to Agile or adopting Agile or even progressing with Agile can sometimes be a challenging endeavor. It's challenging for us as well. Transparency, teamwork, progress, stakeholders. It's complicated when you get more than two people in one room. And so we help ourselves, and we'd love to help you in whatever journey you're on, whether that needs to be training, whether it's coaching, whether it's just a simple phone call to say, hey, how do your retrospectives go? Because ours have not been going well. Any kind of conversation about Agile, big or small, Scrum or Kanban, we'd love to have. And speaking of Scrum and Kanban, that's the subject of today's session. And I know one of the rules that Kurt is going to shatter is, hey, you can't do Kanban and Scrum at the same time. You got to pick one, right? Well, I don't know if that's really true, and I think Kurt's going to bust that myth wide open for us today. So take it over, Kurt.
Thanks, Steve. We are going to do that. And Acceleration is a sibling company of Next Up Solutions that really helps early career developers to get their legs under them and to become really software engineers working in an Agile space. We're seeing a trend towards a lot of folks with a background in great thinking, problem solving skills, wanting to begin to learn how to be software engineers, and we assist in that process at Acceleration, both within private companies, but also in communities and other settings. It's a great organization. Okay, my name is Kurt. As I mentioned, I'm a certified Scrum trainer. I was actually trained by Ken Schwaber back in 2004, if you could believe it. And I became a Kanban trainer in 2018. I'm originally from Texas, and I live in Calgary. My family's actually off at Banff this morning. They got about, I think close to 10 inches of snow. So they're in the powder today, enjoying that. And yeah, I love teaching. I love bridging the worlds of Scrum and Kanban, and we're going to be doing that today pretty directly. So our agenda is these bullet points here. I want to kind of give us a little bit of a kind of a shared understanding of Agile origins and the story of Agile around Scrum, a brief history of Kanban, and then look at how those two paradigms, how those two methods can come together and help you succeed as a team and as an organization. And then I want to talk about a couple things that Kanban is unique in terms of their approach to change. And then we're going to have some interactivity around factors that you have seen amplify Scrum and diminish Scrum, and also where Kanban is a good fit. We'll close with Lean Agile in the enterprise, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. So let's dive into the story of Agile. If you can believe it, this story began over 40 years ago in Japan. So some of these companies I'm sure you recognize, some of them have changed. I don't even know if NEC is around under its current name, but these companies here were product development companies, and they were trying to get products to market quickly, and they were struggling with that. It was taking 3, 4, 5 years to get these products to market, and in that time frame, there were changes in preferences, in trends, in technology, and these products were not simple products by any stretch. These were things like cars, printers, cameras, really complex. And the Harvard Business Review, a couple of Japanese gentlemen who were at Harvard wrote up in the Harvard Business Review what these companies did to accelerate time to market or shorten time to market and to increase innovation in their product development efforts. So they were, at the time, prior to them embracing what became Scrum, they were using what they called a relay race approach, which I'm sure all of us are somewhat familiar with. Some settings, this is an entirely appropriate approach. In the world of product development, it created problems in terms of speed, feedback, and collaboration. So these companies were decided to move from a relay race approach where we had single function specialists handing off to each other to more of a rugby approach. They called it the rugby approach. Now, why did they call it a rugby approach? Well, it was an integrated cross-discipline team moving that ball up and down the field as a unit. So what did this look like? It looked like taking people from various silos, from sales, from engineering, from materials, maybe some QA or tester people, someone from the manufacturing line, and assembling a cross-discipline team and sequestering them in a building separate from their day-to-day work. Now, this is a key that I think points the way towards one of the ways Scrum is, or one of the situations where Scrum is really effective. This team that was assembled was not asked to do both product development and sort of day-to-day operations. They were exclusively focused on building the next prototype for a new camera or a new car or some aspect of a car. And they were given these a 1 month, a 30-day cycle to come up with a prototype that they could then demonstrate and show to stakeholders, get feedback on it, and then run that cycle again. So this was one of the ways, this is what became the Scrum approach. And visually, it looked like a movement from what was considered isolated cycles of work, very sort of staged gate approach, to more overlapping work, which was considered type B in that same article, and then type C, which was all at once. So these were asking people from different disciplines to come together and work together in an intensive kind of time box collaborative way, with the goal of increasing innovation and accelerating or reducing the time it took to get these products to market. And it turned out to be quite effective in helping these companies to achieve those goals. So this is the genesis of Scrum, the Scrum process framework, which we're going to look at in a moment. And this is half of the equation in the Agile Manifesto. So Agile, the other half of you could say the other side of the aisle that came to the altar in the Agile Manifesto was the group from Extreme Programming, or Extreme Programming Community. And it was formulated by Kent Beck, who called himself a good programmer with great habits. I'm not a great programmer, I'm a good programmer with great habits. And building those habits is what we're trying to do with processes like Scrum and Kanban. And so what you see here is some planning and feedback loops and XP practices. And it's interesting because a lot of the things that we assume are connected to Scrum, for example, user stories, release planning, maybe even stand-ups, those actually came out of the world of extreme programming. Those were practices in the XP world. So there's a real blending and merging of Scrum and XP in Snowbird, Utah, when that group of 17 thought leaders came together. And what came out of that was the Agile Manifesto. So the goal of Kent Beck's extreme programming practices was really twofold. He was eager to improve software quality and respond to changing customer requirements, because he was seeing that customers often change their minds. And how do we stay connected to that and really adapt as we go? So this was a different set of goals than innovation and reducing time to market, which is speed, really. So these two parties came to the altar, so to speak, in Snowbird, Utah in February 2021. I'm sorry, February 2001, which was 22 years ago. And the Agile Manifesto was born. And the people who attended this outing, which was called the Lightweight Methods Conference, are listed down there at the bottom, starting with Kent Beck and ending with Dave Thomas. So the Scrum framework is very basic. I mean, it's basic in the sense that it's easy to learn. It's very difficult to master. The product backlog is that list of desired work, or the product owner's wish list. Every 2 weeks, usually every 2 weeks, but it could be every 4 weeks or even every 1 week. The team enters what's called a sprint planning session, decides what subset of product backlog items might we want to tackle and kind of produce over the next 2 to 4 weeks. There's a 24-hour daily Scrum session, and the sprint, which is that cycle of learning and development, it culminates in a potentially shippable product increment. And that, in a nutshell, is Scrum. So, and I want to pause here. Any questions so far on Scrum before we sort of transition into a little bit of a Kanban? Okay, let's keep moving. So Kanban is a word that originated over 400 years ago. So it came into being as a word in Japan, in post-feudal Japan in the 1600s, and it referred to commercial signage. So as commerce began to pick up after the wars sort of subsided, Kanban was a word that described these signboards. It actually translates to signboard that these shopkeepers would use. In this case, it's a fishmonger that's hanging up a fish sign with some Japanese ideograms on it. It changed, or it was reused or repurposed in the 1950s as part of the Toyota production system and Taiichi Ohno. And it came to be known, or it came to be a name for a card that would be sent from a station on the assembly line that maybe was running low on bolts or out of bolts, to send it up to the central inventory and signal to them that, hey, we need some more bolts over here so we can keep putting doors on cars. So it became a prominent word in lean manufacturing. Then in the 1980s and 90s, there was a big movement to learn from Taiichi Ohno's work in the Toyota production system and bring that to large organizations and undertake lean transformations. It was really big in healthcare, and it became a real strong movement in the 80s and 90s at the organizational level. And then in the 2004 and 2005, David Anderson brought Kanban, or brought a way of visualizing work to knowledge workers, and in particular software development and support. And that's when the Kanban method came about, was in the early 2000s. So we tend to think of Kanban and associate it with a cardboard, Kanban board, or what we call a card wall. And if you look at this simple one here, there's some columns that represent the state of a given work item and how it moves through our workflow. And then there's the cards, which in this case, there's a blue cards, yellow cards, and green cards that represent work that our customers care about. So valuable work items that our customers care about is typically what we see on a team board. Now, if you're using a board as an individual, maybe those are tasks. And if you're looking at a board, maybe at a higher level, maybe a program or portfolio level, those cards could actually be projects, or they could actually be products that are moving across different states at different levels. So this way of visualizing work is central to Kanban. And we have things called swim lanes, which are horizontal rows in our Kanban board that offers different ways to view and visualize our work. So we think of some people say, well, we have a card wall, we're doing Kanban, which is true, but there's a lot more depth to Kanban under the waterline. And Matt Phillip is he's one of the agile icons and gurus and coaches at Pfizer, and he conceived this idea of the Kanban iceberg, I guess probably 5 or 6 years ago. And it just reminds us that there's a lot under the waterline around Kanban that we may or may not be aware of. So we want to kind of tune into the fact that Kanban has a lot of depth to it. So my favorite definition of Kanban comes from a gentleman named Brendan Wavchko. He was one of my mentors years ago, and he's the CIO for Dave Ramsey. It's a radio group and actually it's not just, he's a radio personality, but they have a whole program to help people get out of debt. And he calls Kanban a set of organizing principles and practices that clarify how to unhide work and optimize its flow. I want to ask a question to the group. What do you think of this word unhide? When you think of unhide, what association do you have with the word unhide? Because that's pretty central to Kanban. What connection do you make? Give me a word or phrase in the Zoom chat that comes to mind when you hear unhide? Yeah, Will says reveal. Transparency, yeah. Bringing visibility, excellent. Yeah, make visible. Nice, Brian, to show. Yeah, we're making things, we're knowledge workers and we carry a lot around in our heads. Bring to the surface. Yeah, Jose, I like that. So all this stuff that we carry in our heads, we want to bring forward and put it on a wall or on a virtual wall if we're using a virtual, a requirements tracking tool, and unhide it so that we can optimize its flow. So at a glance, Kanban, again, like Scrum, has some simplicity to it. This is a single page infographic that lays out the Kanban method. In the top left, we have the change principles. In the top right, we have the service delivery principles. And in the bottom, the 6 items at the bottom are the general practices. And I'm going to speak to those in just a moment. Now, around the yellow border, the gold colored border, we have 9 values as well. So this is sort of the Kanban method snapshot. This is an infographic you can download from the Kanban University, and it's freely available to you. I'll point you to that resource at the end of this webinar. But I want to take a look at these 6 practices. So let's walk through these one by one. The first practice is visualize our work. So in Kanban, we typically do that by, putting up a board that represents stages of work and states of work. But I want to be clear, visualization doesn't always take the form of a board with columns. It can be a data, it can be like sort of how does work come to us and what happens when it lands in our team. And it can be sort of a diagram that has boxes of activities and arrows connecting them, but it has a visual aspect to it. I'd say the most common is the board, but it's not restricted to the board. We want to, in Kanban, we want to limit work in progress. So we want to put a constraint on the stages of work so that we can begin to surface those bottlenecks and actually put our focus and intention on finishing. One of the big mantras of Kanban is stop starting, start finishing. Many of us as teams have a lot of work in progress, we call WIP. And if we limit that, good things start to happen. We start to get speedier over time. We also start to get more attentive to the things that are right in front of us and usually produce better quality. Managing flow is in part accomplished by visualizing our work, but then also adding some color maybe to our boards. So in this particular example, we have some red cards that could be considered expedite or unplanned work that we want to kind of tackle and keep at the top of our list. We might have some gray cards that are more planned, and some maybe the orange ones in this case are initiatives. So it helps us to kind of look at our work as a collective team or service group and maybe create balance around where we're putting our time and effort on a daily and weekly basis. There's also data visualizations that Kanban brings us that really help us to manage flow. One of those is called the cumulative flow diagram, and it's a visualization of work being delivered over time across the various stages. Run charts are, again, over time, what are some of the markers we have in terms of how frequently we deliver, how quickly we deliver, maybe how much volume, what our throughput is. And then our histogram tells us how responsive we're being to our market or our customers. So all of these data visualizations or metrics are built into Kanban and are part of the Kanban method. Making policies explicit means that we are clear as a collective team, as a group, on what it means to be ready to pull something into stage 1, what it means to be done. If you're a Scrum team, you probably have a definition of done. At the end of an increment or at the end of a sprint, we have an increment and it meets the quality standard we call done. And here's the bullet points that tell us what it means to be done. So making policies explicit is sort of a way of we write down our working agreements to create clarity across the team. The 5th one is implementing feedback loops. If you are a Scrum team, you certainly know a bit about feedback loops. There's many of them in Scrum. There's the daily stand-up or daily Scrum. In Kanban, we have the Kanban meeting, which can be daily. It could also be less frequent. We also have sprint review in Scrum, and correspondingly in Kanban, we have a service delivery review, or an earlier version that's called the flow review. So we have feedback loops, cadences, we call them in Kanban, that help us ensure that we're delivering the right thing to the right people and that we're improving our process as we move together. So feedback loops, a couple of workflow Kanban meeting is an example of one that is analogous to the daily stand-up in Scrum. And then the flow review is similar to the retrospective. It's a little different flavor, but very similar. Improving collaboratively means that when we come together for things like the retrospective, we actually put our heads together, look at our results of our work, talk about the process, and make improvements. So this is Kanban's 6 general practices. If you're a Scrum team, you probably recognize that you're probably already doing some of these things. And this is why I call Scrum and Kanban very closely related. I almost refer to them as siblings sometimes. Any questions on what we've covered so far? Any questions on Kanban? Okay. I mentioned earlier siblings, and I love this picture because you can tell these two are related. Can't you tell that? Like it's undoubtable. It's beyond doubt with the hair, the shape of the nose, the lips. These are I don't know, maybe they're twins, maybe they're just siblings. But I like to jokingly say we're Scrum and Kanban separated at birth. And you could probably make a case for, if a paternity test was taken on Scrum and Kanban, they would have one father, and that would be Taiichi Ohno, who is the father of the Toda production system. They share a lot of things like queuing theory and systems thinking and lean thinking, lean manufacturing. And so if you ask the founders of Scrum and the founders of Kanban, where did your ideas originate? A lot of them would point back to Taiichi Ohno and the Toda production system. And I've actually been in a room with Jeff Sutherland, and he's mentioned this directly. What's different is the context out of which they arose. So Scrum arose out of the world of product development. It's a very specific world with specific factors and goals, and improving innovation was what was important at the time for these Japanese companies. In the world of manufacturing, what was important is to optimize flow and to keep things moving, and to enable the line itself to kind of govern its work and to signal when it had needs. And so optimizing flow was sort of the goal of Kanban, which really, even the Kanban method today in the world of knowledge work, it shares a lot of lean principles from the world of lean manufacturing. So there's a common end goal that both Kanban and Scrum share, and that's to design and develop a quality product and solution. Then to do so quickly, because speed was important in terms of getting products to market, but also keeping the line moving and producing as many cars as you could in a given time frame, and to do so in a way that delivers value to market and or stakeholders. So this value orientation is really common to both Kanban and Scrum, and so I tend to think of them as siblings and not adversaries. Although I guess sometimes we do fight with our siblings, but that's normal. That's kind of natural. One of the phrases I like to use is Scrum has structure, Kanban has flexibility. So when we kind of put these side by side, we want to recognize that Scrum has a set of roles, events, and artifacts. 3 roles, 5 events, 3 artifacts. Now the artifacts are knowingly incomplete, but it's enough of a kind of a skeleton framework for us to embrace and apply in our work setting. And Scrum is a process framework that really tells us how to work. It defines the workflow. It's, instead of waterfall, we're going to use Scrum, which is an iterative incremental model, and it's an empirical model as opposed to a defined process model. In Kanban, we have a set of practices. We went over 6 of those. We also had principles, the change management principles and the service delivery principles. And so Kanban is considered a management method that's applied to an existing workflow. So if you're Kanban, if you're a waterfall shop and you want to optimize the flow of work, you might start bringing some Kanban practices in the door. How do we visualize our work? So I want to be clear that Kanban has a level of flexibility. It's not a process framework. It doesn't necessarily tell you how to work. It kind of acknowledges that you're doing something today in terms of your process. Let's visualize that, and then let's improve it. So it has more freedom to it. It's more flexible, but it also requires, you to think more about the work you're doing and to kind of, collectively agree that it's the right thing to do. So Scrum teams can apply Kanban practices in different areas. They might just bring a board into the sprint and use it to track their product backlog items and their tasks. Very common. In fact, it's a rare Scrum team that doesn't use some kind of workflow visualization inside the sprint itself. They could use a lot of product owners. They like to visualize the flow of stories that are maybe unrefined or not quite ready to be tackled through a refinement process. We need to make sure that we have scripted a performance test for this. We want to size this work item before it gets to the sprint planning session. So using a Kanban board upstream, what we call upstream of the product backlog is very legitimate and valid, and I see it quite frequently. Similarly, when we get the product to a ready to deploy state or potentially shippable state, we might have a visualization of how it moves through deployment and goes into production, kind of our DevOps process. These are all kind of pretty common ways of using Kanban that Scrum teams might employ. There's also, we also might use a board or a visualization above multiple Scrum teams. So we might have multiple Scrum teams working in different disciplines or areas, and we might have some work items, maybe they're epics, maybe they're features, but that are supported or contributed to by multiple Scrum teams that we want to track and visualize above multiple Scrum teams. So this can be another place to apply the Kanban method in a shop or in a company that really is sort of Scrum oriented. Okay, one of the things that's different about Kanban, and I mentioned this in a couple slides back, but I want to reinforce it, is change can be hard. And all at once change can be even harder. When we embrace Scrum, we tend to say, let's do Scrum all at once. I'm not saying you have to do it that way, but we tend to bring Scrum in and install it. Let's identify the roles, let's embrace these events and these artifacts, and let's set up our time boxes. Every 2 weeks, we're going to have sprint planning, we're going to have our sprint review, we're going to have our sprint retrospective, and then we're going to run it again. So there's a rhythm and a cadence that really helps people to build habits and to begin to surface the impediments to building quality software in a short time frame. That can be perfect for some organizations. Other organizations, it can present challenges, and the challenges can range from the way you're structured as an organization to the culture of the team to the nature of the product. So I just want to acknowledge that change in general is hard for people overall. So one of the things where I think Kanban brings us a gift is really the change principles. And let me zoom in on these. There's 3 of them. And the first one is start with what you do now. The second is gain agreement to pursue improvement through evolutionary change. And then the third is encourage acts of leadership at all levels. So when we say leadership here, we're referring to initiative, a sense of ownership, and people taking action because they feel it's the right thing instead of somebody telling them what to do. So Kanban basically says, don't change anything until you understand how things work now. And then once you understand how things work, decide if something's worth changing. It's possible you could do step 1 and then say, hey, we're happy with this. Let's just visualize our work and let's move right along. And maybe there aren't any friction or pain points that would warrant you to necessarily pursue evolutionary change. I think that's unlikely, but I think it's possible. There's nothing that says you can't stop after step 1. But the idea of gaining agreement means that we're all going to decide on a direction we're moving in, and we're all going to grab an oar and we're going to paddle together. And that can take some time. So a lot of change, Kanban change journeys can last months and years because they're more gradual and stepwise. The idea behind this more inclusive approach and kind of meeting people where they are is really to get to a state of flow, which is really productivity and engagement, both at the individual level and at the team level. And this tends to happen over time as people and teams get more connected to their own internal motivations, their own values, their own drives, their own habits. And so this is a process that tends to take a while, and that's part of change and growth as humans. Okay, I want to throw a challenge to you now. We're going to get a little more interactive. What do you believe are some of the environmental factors that would make Scrum more effective or most effective? What would make Scrum hum? I think about it as what makes Scrum hum. What do you think some of those environmental factors would be? Go ahead and type it in the Zoom chat. What do you think makes Scrum hum? Yeah, communication. Nice. Org alignment. Yeah, collaboration. Yeah, a culture, a team that's ready to work together, that doesn't want to just hang out in their cubicles and be handed a document to code, right? So collaboration. Yeah, Kevin, if people are changing their minds, stakeholders are changing their mind, yeah, that would make Scrum a really great process to be playing with. Yeah, and Steve says clarity. Steve, can you say a little more about that word clarity in the context of Scrum?
Yeah, I was thinking, clarity of mission and clarity of hearing stakeholders, knowing who your stakeholders are and knowing what they're after. A clear product vision is, a key environmental factor, at least as far as what I've seen.
100% agree with that. In fact, you took the words right out of my mouth. Number two is that strong business driver or market mandate, a goal, clarity around the goal we're after with, both in adopting Scrum, but then in creating a product that's going to hopefully achieve some measure of success in the market or with our customers. So the 5 factors I've seen that really make Scrum hum are a durable, dedicated core team. So Scrum talks about the number of team members that are needed to sort of make it work. And they'll say, three developers at least, and, up to 7, maybe 8 developers. So between 3 and 7-ish, which would really constitute a 10 to 11 person Scrum team. Now, do all 7, team members need to be, I would say, fully allocated? Like when I say fully allocated, I mean 90% of their time is spent on this product or working from this backlog. Maybe not all 7, but I'd say at least 3, 4, 5. So there's a core that's going to be intact and durable and unchanging, and they're not going to be pulled off to a bunch of other work. So that's number 1. Scrum is super effective if you have a durable, dedicated core team. Now, it's great if you can have all developers are sort of dedicated, 80 or 90% or more to this backlog, but that can't always be the case. You might have a database admin dropping in and then leaving, or maybe a UI expert comes in for sprint 1 and 2, and then they depart. So number 1 is that's my top sort of factor. Just like Steve said, strong business driver or market mandate product goal. Number 3 is we need to innovate here. We're after a more creative solution. Scrum really excels when you acknowledge to people, hey, we're going to leave you alone for 2 weeks to go figure this out as a cross-discipline team. And people tend to thrive in that environment, and it gets a little chaotic, but it gets very innovative. Teams that are independent in the sense of they're not an embedded, software application in a car, for example. When you're a team that has a lot of dependencies, it can be hard to run with Scrum, what I would call textbook Scrum. You have to use more of a scaled approach. And I would say number 4, I had a second part. There was a strong appetite for change. So a group that kind of thrives on, let's try something new. They're sort of invigorated by this challenge of something new. That's a great important factor for amplifying, a Scrum team's effectiveness. And lastly, there's leadership support in clearing systemic impediments. So Scrum teams are going to be working in smaller cycles, raising impediments quickly, like lack of a test environment or network outages, or maybe vendors who are dropping components to us every 3 months instead of every 2 weeks. We need to renegotiate that vendor contract. So leadership support and clearing those systemic impediments is a vital key factor that makes Scrum really hum. So I want to ask you a question. If you could only have one of these factors, which would be most impactful to your team? If you're using Scrum today, or imagine yourself using Scrum, if you're not using Scrum, which one would you choose? Which one of those enabling factors would you choose? Enter a number between 1 and 5. Which number would you choose? Okay, so we got 3 4s. Wow. Okay, we got Kevin putting us at a 1, 5, 4. Wow. So Hira, you can kind of tell me what seems to be winning here in terms of the number.
I think probably somewhere between 4 or 5, probably 4.
Okay. So the fact that 4 is kind of coming forward as an enabler or one of the key amplifying factors tells me that we are in large, complex organizations, and our Scrum teams are one of probably many Scrum teams trying to get a working, tested product out the door. Great. Okay, here is the second question. What environmental factors do you think diminish Scrum's effectiveness? Now, maybe you think they're just the opposite of what you said to amplify, which is probably partially true. But what else can you think about that would diminish Scrum's appropriateness or effectiveness in a team setting? What are some of the things you would see? Oh yeah, Samanthi says lack of trust. Good one. Yeah, there's a team culture that maybe doesn't really have that trust built up that's able to kind of work in a cross-discipline collaborative way. Yeah, nice, Steve. Committee of stakeholders without any connection. So we have a sequestered group of stakeholders. We don't have access to them, but maybe once a month. That's not going to work. Yeah. Mark says lack of teamwork. Yeah, that's another good one. Yeah, communication. So if we struggle with communication, that's going to diminish Scrum's effectiveness, isn't it? Vanessa, you put a really important one up there, micromanagement. So when we live in a command and control culture where we have managers that are trying to help us by telling us what to do, that would be thought of as micromanagement, and that can really diminish Scrum's effectiveness, especially around self-organization. So these are the factors that I think sort of really diminish effectiveness, and it really echoes a lot of what you're saying. If you have a group of part-time team members, if everyone is, for example, 20% allocated to this team and this product backlog, you're going to struggle to have them self-organize. You're going to struggle to find dedication and commitment. You're going to even have struggles finding people to attend the daily Scrum. If you have the absence, or you don't have a product goal, or even stakeholders who can speak to that product goal and give you feedback, that's another diminishing a factor that diminishes Scrum's effectiveness. Work that is more individualistic. I was at a healthcare system in Western North Carolina, and I worked with a 5-person team of what were called interface engineers. And these interface engineers were like plumbers. They're like the plumbers of the world of healthcare systems. And they work to connect one app or system to another app or system and make sure the data is flowing from point A to point B. That usually is one person that's doing that work at a time. So maybe connecting a oncology, patient system to a Cerner database. You're not going to have 2, 3, 4 people swarming on that. It's more functional work. It doesn't really require creativity as much as it requires precision and knowing what to do. So work that's more individualistic, less creative, maybe in a sense, is something that diminishes Scrum's effectiveness. And then if a team is happy with the way things work today, that's going to diminish Scrum's effectiveness. If Scrum is forced on them, it's probably not going to be embraced or really leveraged very well. Dependency on multiple other teams to deliver value or deliver working tested product is another key factor that can diminish Scrum's effectiveness. That's when you need to think beyond single team Scrum and talk about multi-team Scrum. And that could be Scrum at scale. It could be less large. It's called less large scale Scrum. Could be safe, could be something else along those lines. So which one of these factors do you think challenges your Scrum team today most? So which one of these would you consider the biggest burr in your saddle, to use a term from Texas? Which of these is the biggest burr in your saddle as a team? Okay, so Melissa said 4. Do we have some complacency? Maybe we're happy with the way things work today. Okay, Steve says 2. Okay, excellent. Jose says multiple dependencies. Yeah, Shane says 5 as well. Okay, I'm seeing if we have any. Do we have any clear winners? It looks like 2, 3. Looks like 2s and 3s are popular here. Excellent. Okay. So let's kind of zoom. Let's kind of let's circle back and talk about Kanban, and then we got a couple more slides, and then we'll do a Q&A here. So if you have questions, have them at the ready. So again, back to just the kind of recapping Kanban. It's a set of organizing principles and practices that help us to visually manage the flow of work, help us uncover workflow and process problems, and help us foster a sense of shared ownership and agility across the team. And this word, I'm going to bring this word back into focus, unhiding. So Kanban helps us visualize work, clarify the workflow, and illuminate risk. So there's nothing about process. It's sort of a process enhancer. My friend Brendan says Kanban's like a capstone that you could put over any process you're using today and make it better. So that's the way I like to think about Kanban. It's very flexible and very freeform in how you apply it. Some factors make Kanban a pretty natural fit here. A pretty natural fit. So the need for flexibility, responsiveness. If you're a team that's supporting production outages and you don't know what's coming tomorrow or next week, and you need to be flexible and responsive, Kanban's great. Don't try and work in a time box cycle, just work more fluidly. If you have team members that are suffering from overburdening, too much work in progress, Kanban can be a natural way to start to address that issue. Operational work is a natural place to apply and kind of embrace the Kanban method. And having a team members that tend to be self-motivated and like gradual stepwise team-driven improvements can be another factor that can make Kanban a natural fit. That's all I'm going to say about that. We're not going to. This is to the previous page. Let me ask you this: which one of these do you find most resonant with you? Which one of these factors would you consider most resonant with you? Whether you're using Scrum or Kanban, is there one of these that stands out to you as important or resonant? Okay, some 4s and 5s. Yeah, we have self-motivated team members, desire for stepwise improvement. Okay. Yeah, so Vanessa also said 5. Excellent. Okay. So a couple things I would like to talk about just to kind of in closing. Scrum and Kanban can work side by side. Chocolate and peanut butter can come together and make Reese's peanut butter cups. Whether or not you like chocolate and peanut butter, it's a very popular candy all over the place, whether you're in Canada, Europe, or the States. This is a screenshot from a Miro board for a Canadian university that's kind of Toronto based that I've been working with the last 4 or 5 months. They are very they've been very familiar with Scrum, but also challenged by Scrum because of the overhead of the ceremonies. And so what I did with them is I said, look, let's not fight progress. Let's talk about some of the Scrum events that you have in play right now that are important. let's talk about the Kanban practices that are in play, and let's blend those together, and also talk about you know, some of the Kanban cadences we might bring into the picture. So what I had them do was I had them vote on which of the Scrum events were most important to them, which of the Kanban practices did they want to sort of apply, and then let's mix chocolate and peanut butter and see what we come up with. And it worked out pretty well. They've actually been going at this for about a month now, and they seem to like it. One of the big changes is they got rid of the sprint planning session. So what they do is they do more dynamic replenishment of that kind of do next column or do next queue. And it gives them more, it kind of frees them up from having to come together as a team and actually do sprint planning for a subsequent, 2-day window of work. So this is a Scrumban is sort of a blending of the two. There's a guy, Patrick Steyert, who is based in Belgium. He's the inventor of an online simulation called Flow Lab that I use when I teach Kanban. And he sort of called out he almost calls these, like, I think of these as DNA strands of DNA of an agile organization. So any large organization or team that's producing quality products and dominating their market is really going to have 3 capabilities. They're going to be able to collaborate, people working together in cross-functional groups. They're going to be attentive to flow, how to get things to market quickly, and they're going to be attentive to learning. What do we build, for whom, and why? And there's different disciplines that come forward in each of these realms. Scrum really excels in this world of intensive collaboration and getting people to work together as a unit, getting that rugby ball up and down the field as a unit. Kanban really excels at this idea of flow. How do we optimize the movement of features, of epics, of stories across our teams, across our portfolios, across our organizations? So this idea of flow is really brought into focus by Kanban. And then lastly, one of the disciplines that we're all aware of, but we don't necessarily, it's not embedded in either Kanban or Scrum, is design thinking. What problem are we trying to solve? Who are we solving it for? And what's the solution look like? So if we can somehow blend these 3 capabilities, we will become an agile organization. And I would also say learning not just from a market perspective, but learning internally. How do we help our developers to embrace technical agility and agile practices? And this is, again, where acceleration, our sister company, comes into play, really helping those engineering teams with agile practices and advancing their understanding and skills. It's a powerful aspect of learning. So learning is not just design thinking, it's also, I would say, technical skills is part of that package. One last picture before we go into Q&A. This is a visual that came to us from a guy in Dallas named Alan Gerner, and he's semi-retired. And what I really like about this picture is he lays out a relationship between lean and agile. And when we think about agile, we kind of associate it with Scrum. We don't have to, but agile, he says, it's about it's really prominent at the team level and product level. Maybe as we move up to portfolio, line of business, and enterprise, it starts to diminish, and our lean structures of governance, our lean structures, our taxonomies of how we define and sort of, describe work, and how we bring work in, and how we approve of work to be done, budgeting and governance. We want to do that at a lean portfolio level. So I like this picture because it really speaks to the complementary nature of both lean and agile, and of both Scrum practices and Kanban practices kind of side by side. That is the conclusion of my speaking. I'd like to kind of pause here and open it up for questions that I'm happy to field. I'm also happy to call Mac into the picture. He's one of our fantastic certified Scrum trainers, and also like to allow Steve to field any questions as well. So what questions do you have in the next little segment here? And you can come off mute and speak up, or you can type something into the Zoom chat if you prefer that. Okay, Jose, Jose said he has to drop. Yes, this recording will be shared. So Munira asked how to progress my career in technology with Kanban. What's the career path and who uses it the most? So Kanban is broadly applied to many industries, many verticals. It could be software development, but also marketing, human HR, human resources, legal divisions. Anywhere where knowledge work is done is appropriate for Kanban. You can progress your career by going to the Next Step Solutions training catalog and looking at what we have to offer. Team Kanban Practitioner is sort of the opening class, but there's Kanban System Design and Kanban Systems Improvement, and we offer both of those through our training calendar. So Navina, you had a question. When do we use Scrum and when do we use Kanban? Do you want to elaborate on that question a little bit?
Yeah. So basically, like, I'm working as a Scrum Master, but, I worked in previous organization where we are trying to use as a Scrum, but, it's not a fixed, as the projects are coming on, it's better to use on Kanban, but I was just trying to understand between the Scrum and Kanban, when to use. Because if we have fixed team, the resources are not moving, and we have a 9 resources in agile team, then I think it would be good to have for as a Scrum, but I'm not sure on when to use on the Kanban to make sure if the resources are not fixed and projects are going on and people are moving from one to other, right? Can we use as a Kanban? I hope this clarifies my question.
I think so. I mean, I just want to be clear. Kanban is sort of a lens, or it's a way of seeing work that you could apply to any process, including Scrum. So when to use Scrum, when to use Kanban. I think I laid out some factors that I think make Scrum a really good fit, and some others that make Kanban a good fit. So I think that slide will be available to you. I don't have a really clean answer there. I don't know, Mac, do you want to say anything about that in terms of, Scrum and Kanban, or sort of what you see as being something to help teams reach for?
I'm sorry, what was the first part of the question?
Well, the question is, when do we use Scrum? When do we use Kanban? It's sort of a general question from Navina.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering if you see, when you get that question in class, do you have any thoughts on that?
So certainly both approaches are used by teams to get to very high levels of agility and continual value delivery, which is where we want to be. That's why we use agile approaches. In general, I tend to recommend Scrum, particularly as a useful break from whatever we were doing before. So if we were very mired in prior waterfall patterns, things like that, Scrum is often a useful kind of shakeup because it's a whole new pattern. And where we're doing work that's always continually new, it's hard to realize, like, when is a thing done? So having the regular inspection cadence of sprints in Scrum, whether it's 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whatever, that's really, really useful. Kanban, I find, is often really, really good for when at least some of the work that we get is well understood enough that thinking about making value streams more efficient and repeated response to certain types of work is really useful. So I often talk about help desks versus pure development teams. Might be an example where help desk is often better suited with Kanban because it's a 1 or 2 item at a time, continual flow approach, also easier to deal with unplanned work in that context, as opposed to where we're trying to figure out, is this product even a good idea? And we want to be showing people slices of something at regular intervals. Having that cadence from the sprints in Scrum is really useful. That said, very mature teams often end up with one or the other, kind of independent of that. There are great software teams that start Scrum and end up Kanban later because they like the continuous flow nature of it. I know does that help a bit?
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Mac. Appreciate that. We're going to close here in just a moment. Nicole, you asked a great question. What's the future for Scrum and Kanban? What improvements do you see being fine-tuned or tweaked? Well, the Scrum Guide is now 13 pages, and it has some key additions, including the product goal, which is great because you can connect that to KPIs and other measurements at the kind of executive level. So I think Scrum will continue to. I think it's gotten about as bare bones as it can, but maybe some of the language could change a bit. Kanban, I think, will continue to evolve in terms of fine-tuning the practices and really helping people to apply it. I think one of the things that Kanban University is dedicated to is how do we take these principles and practices and make them work for us day to day, week to week. So a lot of the trainings that we do at Next Up in the world of Kanban are really pragmatic and hands-on and help you understand how to apply these things. In terms of the future, I think we're going to see more adaptations. I think people are going to recognize that there's value in both Scrum and Kanban, and they're going to pull practices and things from both and sort of build their own process, so to speak. I'm going to conclude us here. Steve, do you want to say any closing words for us at all from being our fearless leader? Oh, I think we need to get you off mute.
Yes, great session. I think we started to clear up some confusion about Kanban and Scrum. And as you mentioned, acceleration is a great software engineering solution that we offer in addition to our Scrum and Kanban and Agile offerings, both training and coaching. So we'd love to work with any organizations or any folks and just send any questions to us that you might run across. We're always happy. And when is the next webinar? Is it scheduled? I might be putting Hida or Mac on the spot here in terms of the next webinar for folks.
The next webinar will be on March 28th, and it's called The What's, Whys, and Whens of Agile.
The What's, Whys, and Whens of Agile, that's in 5 weeks, March 28th. And if you follow our Next Up page on LinkedIn, just follow us on LinkedIn, you'll get a notice for that.
Thanks so much, Steve. Mac, thanks for weighing in. Hira, thanks for being here and making this a great session. We'll see you, everyone. Take care. We'll see you at the next webinar.